Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone
Yeah.
up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a
But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible for him? Pistols and fondle slab of choice, I don't know that doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information. Because seriously, they don't want you to just read two together whenever I try to prove out. It's not. You expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to sadly disappoint on another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty old man, huh?
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions. Eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of.
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from FEMA Region 2,
3.
within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America. We bring you the Ochelli Effect.
It's like, damn sure, no, I'm an original.
We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
That's that.
for a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
And that is certainly that. It is live, a Saturday night, as it were, on UCY.TV radio. This is the Ochelli Effect, as that very obnoxious bumper tells you, and I'm Chuck Ochelli, your host. Today is, of course, the 3rd of January, 2015. Anyway, tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. I have an author to bring on, and his name is Dean Hartwell. Now, Mr. Hartwell has actually written a handful of books, and I'm sure we're going to wind up discussing that. Meanwhile, just, for current events and things like that, and all that kind of good stuff, I've got a lot of very strange opinions about certain things, according to most of the sleepwalkers out there, but it doesn't mean that I'm entirely married to every single position I presented on my show. So we may see some changing positions coming up very, very soon regarding some things, but if the day comes that I tell you that Oswald acted alone, something is very wrong. Outside of that, I'm open to interpretations. So, as I said before, the author that I wanted to bring on tonight is named Dean Hartwell. And he has written an interesting book most recently that we're going to discuss tonight for sure, and probably get into some of his other writings, some of his other work out there. Really fascinating guy. Hello, Mr. Hartwell.
Hey, Chuck. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm hearing myself feedback a little bit. If you could either turn down your speaker or put in your headset, that would be good.
All right.
But I wanted to like I was saying, and I didn't even give the title. Wonderful. This is the kind of day it's been for me, guys. So I apologize to everybody listening. Usually I'm right on top of this kind of stuff, but believe me, I'm not completely out of my mind. I just it's been a long couple of days. Okay. Anyway, the beginning of 2015. Definitely, I say again, this will be a seriously pivotal year, and if the first couple of days in my personal life are any sort of exemplar for that possibility, it's a guarantee that we're looking at a pivotal time in human history, in my opinion. But anyway, Mr. Hartwell's book. Now, I have read a lot of books. Most notably, I've explained on my broadcast that, that the minimal count that I can make for reading books devoted to the JFK assassination is 300. And those are the ones that I completed. Okay, I'm not even talking about the ones that I picked up, started to read, found completely, ridiculous in their premise, and just tossed them aside. I'm talking about the ones that I completed, and believe me, plenty of those had ridiculous premises in them as well. But I got to be honest with you, Mr. Hartwell. What I do a lot of times, I'm very, very rough, very critical. I don't review a lot of books online or anything because I know that I'm extremely unfair to authors regarding their presentations. I mean, I take them to task for reverse engineering their conclusions and all kinds of stuff like that.
Right.
Now, I want to say something. Your book, though, is not... I'll say this, and I'm going to suggest that anybody listening to me goes and gets themselves a copy of this book, and I'll tell you something else. I don't care if you agree with it or not. I can say this about it, is it's very, very honest. This is, I can see that there is a genuine deconstruction of your personal thought process being committed to paper. And this is remarkable in and of itself, regardless of the material covered. The fact that I see an honest effort to explain the thought process behind what it is you're writing is simply amazing anyway, because like I said, there are too many authors out there who absolutely start with a conclusion, cherry pick things together to basically complete their summation in one way or another and almost prosecute facts like a prosecutor. I mean, and I'm not even just talking about guys like Vince Bugliosi, who I despise, but I mean, other people out there do the very, very same thing and speak to us from sort of a position of authority because they're supposed to be a PhD, they're supposed to be a doctor, they're supposed to be on and on and on about what sort of qualifications, what their reputations are. So therefore, listen to me because I understand it from this point of view. I have a greater amount of education, and they make serious, crazy leaps of faith right in front of your face on the pages of their own books, and expect you to follow along. But this is not what you do. So, first of all, I just want to say, big thumbs up from a guy who feels tortured by some of the books he chooses to read. that you had an honest and clean process that you presented publicly in your book. So, but anyway, enough of my nonsense and rambling on about what it is I see here. Let's just begin to give people an idea of who you are, because you've written more than just this book. I got to be honest with you. I've only read this book.
Okay.
Believe me, some books when I have even taken the time to read them, regardless of whether an author has sent them to me or not, I really feel like I need a refund of the amount of time that I spent on their nonsense usually. And didn't feel this way about your book. But I wonder if you could kind of, in a way, explain to my audience who you are and how they can find you and stuff like that. I mean, I put out a couple of links too. You can get his book through Amazon and a lot of different places. There's a Facebook page actually devoted to your writings, and you're available everywhere in electronic form as well as in my preferred medium, which is the the trade paperback style type. But anyway. So I wonder if you could just explain to my listeners who you are and what it is that caused you to write this particular book. We'll start there. How about that?
Thank you, Chuck. How am I sounding at this point?
You're okay. You're okay, and I'm not hearing myself back. That's the only thing.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm Dean Hartwell, and I love to learn and I love to write. And my reason for writing my latest book, questions I wasn't supposed to ask, is because I wanted to examine my own beliefs. I believe that was the best way to explain to others why they should or shouldn't hold a particular belief. And it's really a continuation of other books I've written about specific topics. I've written about 9/11, I've written about the JFK and RFK assassinations, among other things. And I really became focused on the lack of planes and passengers in the 9/11 event. I focused on that, and then as a part of my evolving beliefs, I see 9/11 not as the big event, but rather as more of a tree in the forest of government corruption, the forest of media lies. And I'm trying to help people make sense of those lies because, among other things, lies bother me. They bother my mind, and they bother our ability to communicate with one another.
Yeah, that is definitely a sense I get from reading questions I wasn't supposed to ask. Is that primarily you're very disturbed by dishonesty, and that's the thing. Like I said, not only do you present it that way, because a lot of people present themselves as analytical authors who are going to get to the bottom of things for us. Who I decided I was going to get to the bottom of whatever. It doesn't even matter. I mean, I always use the JFK assassination because that's one of the things that I spent a lot of time on.
Right.
But let's just use that for the example. Generally speaking, they turn around, they give you the chapter which could generically be named, okay, here's the official story. Then after they complete that and their explanation for why they decided to write the book, they generally leap into their prosecution of the of the official story in one way or another, usually seizing upon a particular area of interest. It may be witnesses, it may be forensics, whatever it is. Here is my presentation to you as to why there is a difference between what the official story is and what the truth is. Okay. So, in a way, they're sort of presenting themselves as truth seekers in one form or another, and these things are done in any effort to revise what is, generally historical, part of the historical canon, as it were, in the mainstream or the academic sense, right?
Right.
But you didn't exactly do that. You turned around and said, okay, I'm going to go through these things one at a time. And let's just say something. You didn't just stick to political issues in this book. You started actually, you know what, I'm going to just turn to the book myself right now because I had notes on this and can't find them now. But of course, you started with gatekeepers and gatekeeping. Those were two of the first sections after your preface and introduction. And I wonder if you wanted to just kind of explain why it is you decided to start there in this book.
I started there because just in writing the other books and deciding what to write about this time, I thought there are people that have told me what not to believe. And I wanted to start out with that and try to allow the reader to either identify with me or not, and I think they will identify with me. I've picked 4 institutions that I think keep the gate closed about different ideas that stray away from the official theory that you were referring to a minute ago, or the standard about that we believe perhaps in school, and identified the government, the media, the family, certainly.
Right.
And also the church. And there just seemed to be an orthodox, and I heard the orthodox theory first in each of these cases. And I talked about Christianity. I talked about whether Jesus Christ really lived or not. And people sometimes say to me, Dean, how can you say that? How can you ask such a question? And that's the problem right there. When you get to the point where you feel inhibited to ask a question, that's probably a good question to ask. And that's probably when you're bumping into one of the gatekeepers to which I refer.
Well, right, and honestly, if you think about these 4 institutions, as they were, or as you generally describe them, they really do make up your earliest impressions. That from a social standpoint, from you socializing with other people, interacting with the world, as it were. This is generally where your points of authority come from. You believe what you see on the media as a child. You believe what say the church says because your parents told you to believe what the church says, and then there's your parents, your brothers, your sisters, etc. These are all where your information comes from, and your beliefs are sort of shaped, forged from these inputs. So it makes perfect sense to start there, and that's the funny part, because generally, and like you said, it's interesting that the people like to tell us what it is we should not believe. That right there is suspect to begin with, and not simply because it points immediately to a gatekeeper, but also because, look, when someone doesn't present a positive storyline regarding their particular truth or their particular sense of truth, they only seek to undermine the truths of others without presenting their own conclusion or without presenting their own evidence, as it were, or their own version of the story. That to me is immediately suspect as well, because there are such things as just simple contrarians out there, which I don't know exactly how to codify this, but they just seem to only be interested in undermining things as opposed to ever accomplishing anything as well. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh, I do.
And
I'm
you
looking for
definitely
facts.
cover that
I see
here.
facts as being the common currency
Mm-hmm.
that
Exactly.
we should have. And we're not getting a lot of beliefs, and beliefs are rather subjective. If we talk about my beliefs and your beliefs or the next door neighbor's beliefs, it could be a matter of me playing poker and you playing hearts, and we'll both follow the rules that favor the cards that we happen to have in our hands. And I don't think that's a good way to play it, whether we're talking about card games or whether we're talking about having a conversation about one of these topics.
Well, right, and of course the the historical reality. See, here's the funny thing to me, because I've had this argument with some people about the historical reality of the actual Christ figure, right? In my opinion, after some time, my conclusion has been that there is very little historical proof for him. That doesn't, in any sense, to me, undermine the belief system which is based on the story. You could have a belief system which is fully based on something entirely fictional, and I have no objection to that. If you want to worship potatoes, I'm fine with it. You know what I mean? It's not for me to judge. My interests begin to get involved with this kind of thing when your belief system encroaches upon me and the people I care about. If you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, it's fine. Yeah. But the historical evidence versus the religious belief, they're not necessarily tied together in my mind. So I'm not asking an insulting question. At least that's not my intent. But at the same time, this is what happens, right?
Right. It does, and I suggest in this book we can do better than that. We can get down to the common facts by asking the most basic questions and then working our way to being more specific. The question about Jesus Christ being one of them, but other questions I've asked, for example, did anyone really die in New York City on 9/11 at the World Trade Center? Some people, again, are going to find that to be an insulting question, but the question, I think, still should be asked.
Well, because this is the thing. There are stipulations that people make when they're having these discussions or debates.
Yeah.
And this is what you deconstruct here is you say, listen, let's not begin with these stipulations, because this influences the reality of what it is we're talking about when we're having a dialogue. And that's the most interesting part here, is that you're actually dialoguing with your reader in a way. In your book, which is very different, and really, again, I applaud your style and your I hate to even use the word, but your honesty.
Thank you.
It's really great to see, and you know what I'm saying regarding the sort of dishonest agendas that you see regarding these types of books, where we're questioning again the official stories, the official institutional narratives, etc. You see these problems from other authors, and again, I really love the way that you did it, because you pull back and say, listen, let's ask the honest question first. Why should I accept this? And I'm not saying that I won't accept it, but why should I accept it? Let's see the proof. And then from there, where does that lead us? And I really think that's great. And you're right. It does become an insulting question. What is the proof that something happened? What is the, how about what is the proof that, that JFK was murdered, etc., right?
Right.
All of these things could be questioned so long as you're not talking to someone who is a first-hand witness.
Right.
I figure.
Right. Interesting. I at one time was a Facebook friend with a person who was an eyewitness to the assassination. So it was interesting to get their take on things. But yes, I agree. You're right. The audience, as an author, always understand your audience, and then conversation understand your audience.
Well, are we talking about Jim Tague by chance?
We are happening to be talking about Jim Tague, yes. Who
Okay.
sadly passed on, yes.
Yes, he did earlier in 2014, unfortunately. And I spent a lot of time talking to him, actually, over the phone. Not too much electronically, but over the phone a lot. And really interesting guy. And yeah, he had a definite set of beliefs based on what he experienced and what he knew. Toward the end of his life, he was very much married to the LBJ Did It camp.
Yes.
And all of that. And as a matter of fact, I was kind of regretful of some of my last conversations with him because he wound up screaming at me about it. But
wow.
Yeah, rather sudden, his death, actually. And somebody I really wanted to get on the show but did not because I was kind of waiting for him to cool off. And, his grandchildren used to interrupt our phone conversations all the time.
Really? That's funny. Yes. There is a matter of eyewitnesses. And then, how can anybody say anything happened? Well, of course, if they're an eyewitness, they'll have their own perspective, and it's a very good perspective. But questions can still be asked. They've just got to be asked tactfully. Whether a person, for instance, I'm not referring to Mr. Tague or anything, but I'm just saying a person being cross-examined could be asked about bias or about problems they might have had in hearing, perception, or seeing. There's still questions that can be asked of a first-hand witness that are good and tactful.
Well, right, absolutely. And and again, just to go into something that you explore in the book, of course, you sort of deconstruct. One of the more interesting eyewitnesses, who was the star witness for the Warren Commission, really quickly and really efficiently, by the way.
Thank you.
Mr. Brennan.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that always disturbed me was this guy, because of course he claims to see things that simply don't make sense on the face of them. And this is before we even take the time to study whether he was wearing his glasses or not, which he required.
Oh, right.
Right, but you don't even need that. You don't even need that, and you don't even need to go into that deep minutia, because as you very skillfully point out, and as I see very few people ever point out, the idea that he sees a shot happen and then also sees the impact of the shot means that effectively he'd have to move his eyes at the speed of a bullet.
Right.
In order, and also refocus them, because when you move your eyes, you change focus. All of that must happen in this fraction of a second, which is virtually impossible. I mean, not entirely, but unless you really knew where that shot was going and had the wherewithal to immediately target, the impact of the shot and all of this, it is so highly unlikely to have been witness to both things that right there, his statement is extremely questionable and is meant to be cross-examined, and people have done that. But this is a great example, and you do this in many cases. I really do, again, appreciate the book, which is, questions I wasn't supposed to ask. And in case you guys see this floating around on the internet, it's actually got a green and a red puzzle piece and two little amorphous, kind of indistinctive figures, sort of seeming to push them together, and one of them says fact and the other one says myth, by the way, on it. So if you happen to see that picture, I'm telling you, the book, and also if you're a Kindle person, it's actually really inexpensive on Kindle if that's what you want to do. I prefer to actually hold the book, a regular old book, old-fashioned as I am, in my hand and be able to flip back and forth and make notes on the pages and things. But either way, I'm telling you that this is definitely worth reading just for the process. And if you don't mind, I'd like to go backwards a little bit.
Sure.
Because of course you did sit and go through a pretty lengthy conversation about Christianity as well.
Yes.
Which I found, again, extremely honest and remarkable. First, you show that there is a difference in your own personal perspective regarding when the questions came up. I mean, obviously, the question that a child asks themselves doesn't have the same gravity nor the same complexity that, say, a young adult will ask. And then, of course, a more seasoned adult asks the very same type of question. I wonder if you could talk about that, like the evolution of perspective, because that's something that you seem to illustrate here very, very well.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I think my evolution of perspective was a lot about fear. I was a little kid when I first heard this story, the good news that many call it, reference to Jesus Christ and the Christian religion. And a friend, I gotta say, ironically, the same friend who introduced me to Playboy magazines was the guy that told me the good news. Figure that out. Anyways.
Oh, I could give you a psychological reason for that, but let me not interrupt you. Go ahead.
Anyways, he tells me the good news, and he says there's this person or entity or whatever word a 7-year-old would use. I'm trying to think, but there's God, and he's everywhere, and he's watching us. And I said, "Wow, I've never heard of God," and I felt guilty. I felt guilt, and I felt fear that this God was watching me and reading my thoughts. So I better go and do something about this. So after he finished playing tag, I went and prayed for forgiveness for not knowing about God, talking to God. That's I guess a 7-year-old's way of looking at the world. Then later on, it was not just about fear; it was about incentive. A friend of mine, this was I'm trying to think, 2 or 3 years later, another friend altogether, telling me about people walking on the streets of gold because they believed in Jesus, and I said, who is that? So again, guilt, not hearing about this person or this entity who was important to my friend. Again, kind of the same reaction, but this time I was thinking, wow, I'm missing out on these streets of gold, the heaven that my friend talks about. So it's been fear, it's been incentive, and then later on, my thoughts evolved, and I thought, well, I better read this book that refers to God. I was about 12 years old at this point. And after hearing a sermon at my grandparents' church, I should point out my parents are not churchgoers. My grandparents were devout Methodists. I listened, and the preacher said that we ought to be reading the Bible an hour and 12 minutes a day. And I was struck by the odd timing. He didn't say an hour or about an hour. He said 1 hour and 12 minutes a day, and I took that literally. And I read from page 1 to the page end of the whole Bible. And I gathered knowledge about what it was saying, but I think I still had that 7 and 9-year-old mentality about fear and incentive, and I was looking for ways to believe that the stories presented were true rather than being critical. My critical thought did not come about till perhaps 5 or 6 years later. So I think that's how it evolved.
Well, because there is an interesting point to be made there, is that there is a huge divide between critical thought and seeking to support one's supposition. And this is the thing. You can cast aside a great many facts and realities if you're not seeking anything that doesn't support your particular idea. And this is why I was contrasting you to these other authors, because this is what they generally do, is, okay, I have an idea, and now I'm going to seek things to support it, and they find them, but they cast aside, contradictory points to it, and here's my presentation, and here you go. Meanwhile, you don't get involved in why it is they came up with their conclusion. They just simply, like I say, sort of make a prosecutor's brief for what it is that they're deciding to present, which obviously is not going to show the exculpatory evidence, as it were.
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to. So I mean, and that's really the great part about this. So go ahead. As we're evolving here, we're going through, and you did note this in the book and everything. We're going through the difference between first learning about the sort of crime and punishment end of religion, as it were, which vaguely sounds a lot like Santa Claus too, doesn't it?
Sure
because
does.
After all, if he's always watching. He
Yep.
knows when you're asleep. He knows when you're bad. And if you're really good, you get toys. And if not, you'll get coal in your stocking, or help us all. Krampus will come and see you. But but either way, it's very similar, right?
Yes.
So
It
okay,
is.
but then again, they say, well, this is good to present it in a childlike fashion, but you didn't just simply accept that. You said, okay, first I'm going to take this, hour and 12 minutes, which you did also explain that in the book, and that was really interesting. And did you come up with a reason for why it was an hour and 12 minutes?
I estimated the time out, and I concluded it was about 5% of the 24-hour day. I don't know how the preacher came to 5% as being the proper percentage, but I did at some point make a calculation. I think that's correct.
Yeah, something like that. So, let me see here. So, if you had to go 20 times, well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, because if you were multiplying by 20 times, you would have 20 hours and then 20 12-minute periods. Yep. So that would make, so 24 hours, right. That's correct. Okay, sorry, I just did that math in my head while I was
I know, it took me a while to figure that out. I think it was probably not until I started writing this book that I actually said, okay, what does an hour and 12 minutes mean? I didn't even question it. I thought it was odd, but I never really questioned it. But I took it literally, and I read it straight through every day, an hour and 12 minutes precisely. And I came to the end of it and was just scared to death by the book of Revelation, which I have thoughts about altogether. That's, of course, an interesting topic in its own right. And, of course, it ends the Bible, and it drove me to just become a bit of a zealot, I think, because I was so scared to death that the end of the world was going to happen, any minute. And it gave me a nervous tick about looking up into the sky, looking for something.
Well, that gives you a sense of immediacy for why it is, you can't sort of pile up your bad acts now and later on get to doing the good stuff so that your balance sheet is okay, right?
Right.
Because if it could eminently all come to an end, you'll be accountable at that point in time. So,
right.
And this is a point in the journey that, again, I identified with because I spent a lot of time looking into different religions, some would call them dead religions, a lot of them, but the modern accepted sort of mainstream religions, some of the more fringe aspects of it, et cetera, and Methodists, which there are some in my family as well. There are also a lot of Catholics. Neither of which do I count myself as, but right. The point is that the Methodist way of doing things actually probably explains that 5% very, very well, because they come up with sort of an acceptable, palatable way to present, even though they are separate from the Catholic Church seemingly, they are still under the banner of the Catholic Church. If you ever read a Methodist Bible, they'll tell you that they still answer to the Catholic Church, but interesting the sort of way that they do things, and that 5% of the day makes a lot of sense, actually.
Right. It does. All this in hindsight, but yes, that makes a lot of sense.
So, and again, I identified with this, but of course it took me down a different rabbit hole, as it were, and I know that's an overused sort of term, but, hey, what are you going to do? The thing is that, I started to study, well, how is it that this book came about?
Hey, that's a good question.
Who wrote it? and who wrote it? And then when you learn that it's various authors, you want to know, well, then who did the editing job here? Because who decided what went in and what didn't go in? Because I guarantee there was stuff that didn't go in. And then you wind up, discovering the Council of Nicaea and what it is they decided to include and not include, and what was actually, even up for consideration. All of this was a process.
Right.
And is this the guided, word of God via these people that came together in this process, or is it a man-made construction and simply there to give people the framework for their behavior? These are the questions that I started asking at a very young age.
Right.
And of course, you know exactly how far those things can go, so that took up some of my reading years.
Mine too. I read about other religions. I read about atheists and their ideas about why they didn't believe in God, or what their philosophy was. I read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I was getting different perspectives, and I still feel pretty well rounded out. I've reached a lot of different sources about this topic. So I feel pretty good that I'm educated.
Yeah, and again, that's clear, but the thing that you can't get from books, to be honest with you, is the thought process, and I'm wondering, exactly at which point the thought process that you're currently presenting came together, because I can sort of feel my way through the evolution of this based on what you put in here,
Right.
but but okay. Let's move into something else, though, because politics, of course, immediately enters into this discussion, because I feel as though religion was, politics before, the common man was involved in politics. So, you know, but again, this is my jaded point of view, and if you object to anything, go right ahead and speak up. But politics, in and of itself, and not even necessarily just the American political scene, but politics in general. But of course, you do spend some time sort of breaking down the American political scene as it is, and I wonder if you wanted to speak to that point.
Right. I like to look at recent historical events. And there have been a couple of elections that I've written on previously that I just built on here. One was the election of 1980. I think a very important turning event election. It was President Carter and then Governor Ronald Reagan, and John Anderson was a third-party candidate. In a previous book, I went into detail about John Anderson, whom I've had the chance to meet. I really admired him. That was in the first book I wrote. Truth Matters. However, I didn't really go into the Anderson candidacy in this book. I talked about President Carter and the hostages in Iran as a way of understanding what's going on now. It's been 34, 35 years since this election, but the tactics used by the Reagan campaign are used even now, perhaps in different ways, but the tactics of dishonesty and duplicity. We had, of course, hostages being held in Iran. That turned out to be one of the main issues of the election. And I've read, again, different books, different takes, different perspectives on this. But it boils down to, our hostages, if they were to be released before the election, Carter probably would have won. People don't realize now that it was a fairly close election until about a week or so. And I put a poll in there, polls to show the closeness of that election. Anyways,
right. The only candidate there that was not performing well was Anderson, actually, right. And I recall that. And I'll tell you what, generally, even people that consider themselves well studied in modern American history always forget Anderson being the third candidate that was sort of available. They always think of, the first third party guy that we ever saw on the national scene was Ross Perot, but that's not true at all. Anderson was a really fascinating guy, more of a peace candidate in a way, right?
Right. Independent, a person who really thought out his positions well, somebody not really enamored with either political party, and also somebody determined to get on the ballot in every one of the 50 states. He was the first independent candidate to do that. In the court cases, the court cases he won in 1980 allowed Perot to get on the ballot in all 50 states 12 years later. It just paved the way, whether that was good or bad.
No, but that's exactly why I mentioned it, because he is the forgotten third-party guy. I got to be honest with you, in hindsight, really wish we had somehow, and I was far too young to be involved in the political process at that time, but just looking back from what I remember and also studying a little bit later, if I had a wish list here, I would love to have seen an Anderson presidency. So
great.
But go ahead. I'm just pointing out my particular point here and telling people that definitely look into that third party candidate in the 80 election, because this is something that may actually teach us a lot of lessons about introducing a third party candidate into the national discourse regarding at any point in time.
Right.
Because, again, he laid the groundwork for a guy like Perot to be able to do that, and who knows, maybe even in the future we'll see somebody still utilizing the same things that this guy laid the groundwork for. So, I'm sorry to interrupt, but go right ahead.
Oh, no problem, Chuck. Back to Carter, he was Of course, on behalf of the whole nation, trying to get the hostages back, and he was trying to work with the leaders of Iran. And for a while, it looked like perhaps a deal could be struck, but mysteriously, the Iranian authorities stopped negotiating with the Carter administration. And this wasn't really said much at the time. In fact, it was a number of years later until some people started to speak up about it. Barbara Honegger was one of those who did. And Bani Sadr, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly because I read his name a lot, I don't hear it much. He was the president of Iran. He admitted that the Iranians had made a deal with the Reagan campaign in order to get weapons in exchange for a delay in the release of the hostages. And I've told people this, and they say, no way. But it's common knowledge that the Reagan administration, about 6 years later, made a deal with the Iranians, slightly different. It was weapons for the release of hostages. And I don't understand why there'd be a disconnect there. It's really the same duplicity that Reagan, I'm not just picking on Reagan, other administrations have engaged in duplicity too, but I just hadn't remembered this.
Well, yeah, and interesting also when you slide history back just a little bit now. If you go back to 1968, okay, the Johnson administration was really trying to end the Vietnam conflict.
Yes.
Okay, and this I say in all fairness, although I have no love for LBJ regarding what he did to this country, what he allowed to happen, regardless of the greater things that were passed, like the civil rights bills and things like that, there was a lot of damage done due to his complicity with the military-industrial complex, on and on. But he was legitimately trying to negotiate his way out of that quagmire that was Vietnam, and would last for nearly a decade more after he did not run in '68. But what's little known is that apparently representatives from the Nixon campaign wanted to make sure that they undermined those efforts so that the Democratic candidate in that year would not find any sort of coattails to ride on based on being the party that ended the Vietnam conflict. And a lot of people don't know that. But these things, they often do things like delay, positive conclusions to events, or allow deals to go through until after an election. And we see these things leading up even to today. You'll notice that when pivotal elections are coming up, they often delay processes or keep things sort of under wraps until after the selection is done, as I like to say. So, and I'm sure you've read about that as well, right?
Certainly. All these things, they happen over and over in slightly different ways. There's, Chuck, I've just gotten to the point, reading about this kind of duplicity, a term I think works well here. Mm-hmm. It happens so often, I've just got to the conclusion, or maybe a tentative conclusion, that they're all just puppets. All these politicians, especially those who run at the highest levels, are just being controlled really by other interests. And I get into that with the 2000 election of Al Gore and George W. Bush, in which talk about belief. My belief is I still can't believe that Gore didn't whip him in this election. The economy was good, and we were at relative peace with the rest of the world. And the only negative thing was something that President Clinton had done that Gore had nothing to do with. But somehow Bush was even close boggles my mind, and it led me to ask some questions about that election. And I think I hinted that maybe, just maybe, Gore threw the election.
Well, that's one thing, the possibility, and I do allow for different possibilities here, but I do allow for the possibility that Gore was just not a very likable candidate personally. He just came off very, he was not Bill Clinton. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't a guy who you seemed to identify with. This was part of the problem. But in reality, when you start to examine these things, and over again they happen, it's not about the personalities, it's about the playbook. And after a while, yeah, you do kind of come to the conclusion that, well, these things are being controlled. The game is quite rigged, and generally speaking, it's, in my opinion, again, it's the corporate interests that run everything. So it really is irrelevant who the players on the stage are, who the puppets are, because the guy who's really controlling the broadcast of Sesame Street, as it were, is not Bert, Ernie, or Grover. Okay, it's it's realistically it's the people that own the TV station. Okay, so there you go, and of course this is the inescapable conclusion if you do examine these things critically after a while, right?
Right. And it may come as disturbing to some people, but I think, again, it's a reasonable question to ask. Do the elections truly matter? And if I've always voted, and it's become a habit, I suppose, and maybe even a belief that the elections matter, but I wonder about that myself, how much it matters.
Well, right, and it's certainly a reasonable question, at the very least.
Right, kind of with an eye to 2016, candidates are being discussed, but I'm not really sure what difference it's going to make among the possible candidates, because, again, I'm wondering who's behind them. Is it really them?
Well, yeah, and that is the point, is that they don't seem to set their own agendas. And of course, this leads us right into, because as you and I have this discussion, and we may be at slightly different points of view regarding this, but we are looking at the same playground,
Yes.
We're definitely examining the same point of the planet here and saying, there is grass, and we can see who's playing on it and who might actually be managing the teams. But here's the thing: when we start to have these kind of discussions with people that want to, create scapegoats, as it were, for different parts of their personal experience in this country and others. I mean, this applies internationally, right?
Yes.
The thing is, then you do start to discuss social issues and, of course, interactions between people. So the literal sort of social dialogue that occurs, not necessarily through conversation all the time, but in some cases through interaction, this is yet again one of these other factors that we can examine to sort of, get at these questions I wasn't supposed to ask, which is the title of the book. And this is the thing, when you begin to critically break them down, what happens? So, I mean, give people an idea about this section on social issues, if you could.
Oh, yeah, social issues. I think, Chuck, the big issue I was constantly hearing about throughout last year was about guns. You turn around, you hear about somebody getting shot, a police officer shooting some citizen, or a citizen shooting a police officer, and I think it just stimulates fear. And this ties back to what I was saying about religion earlier. I mean, we're deeply affected by our fears, and when people talk about guns, possibly again the biggest social issue, people are often I hear people say that they need protection, and I'm thinking, well, do we really know what the possibilities are here? When people talk about guns, they assume that they or their family or friends are going to be on the good side of the issue. But what if they're not? What if, Well, I'm not supposed to ask that, but,
And that leads to another problem, which is, listen, what is actually the greater mechanism of protection? Let's define protection. If you absolutely eliminate all guns from society, would this protect us or not?
There's other weapons.
There's other weapons, exactly, and of course, the skill or access to those weapons, from a societal standpoint, from a social standpoint, is a big divisive issue, and is relative all the way around, because again, you say, how do we protect ourselves from gun violence? Well, look, there is a logic to saying that, if there are greater controls by the greater government entities, making it harder for people to have guns, that we will be more protected. There will be less problems, right?
Right.
Seems kind of logical. But on the other hand, if everybody's armed, that in and of itself would change the equation, right?
Right.
You know, you wouldn't have somebody, you know, let's use the standard example. You wouldn't have somebody, you know, going in to stick up a store if they're well aware of the fact that, you know, every cashier probably has a sidearm. You know what I mean? If we were all armed. But then again, does that lead to more problems? Because, you know, and on and on. You can keep twisting this issue back and forth. And make logical points on both sides of the issue, really, right?
Right.
You know, and then it just gets into, well, and here's my problem, and I've been excoriated by some people for, you know, taking a different view on capital punishment, let's just say.
Okay.
And the reason why I have a dim view on capital punishment is not from the moral standpoint, where, you know, I simply believe that, you know, murder, regardless of who is pulling the trigger, is immoral. That's not my top side objection here. My objection is that I no longer trust the government entities which would be entrusted with this. That they are all simply corrupt. The game is so rigged that in my estimation, no one gets a fair trial, and that power to decide, you know, the finality of someone's existence should not reside with a government which is so corrupt. This is where I'm at with the issue. And meanwhile, you know, I have people that tell me, well, you know, if somebody attacked and hurt your family, you know, you'd want to take care, you'd want justice, yes, I would. But on the same, you know, on the same hand, not even on the other hand, but on the same hand, I don't trust the system who is going to prosecute the individual. I don't trust that the evidence will be collected correctly, because over and over again we see different agendas being met when it comes to investigation. And I don't see the courts being honest in their way of handling things in any case. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and I can identify with that. I talk about in the book being involved in a court case, thinking that the system actually worked at one point, and really wanting to be a juror, and then going and being a juror and having a really awful experience, which casts that's a first-hand experience, which leads me to cast some doubts about the system in general.
Well, right, and that's why I wanted to lead into that, because you actually reproduce the interaction there between you and the court. And I wondered if you wanted to speak about that a little bit.
Sure. The case took place in 2007. It was called Cohan versus NBC. David Cohan was a co-plaintiff. He wrote or co-wrote the hit series Will and Grace, and he and a co-worker, co-plaintiff Max Munchnick, I hope I pronounced that correctly, sued NBC Studios for breach of contract and for fraud, alleging that, in effect, NBC and NBC Studios had arranged for the fair market value, or given their thoughts on fair market value, rather than allowing a negotiation between the plaintiffs and NBC. It also alleged that they didn't pay what they're supposed to pay. So I was put on that jury in Los Angeles, and having gone to law school, I found this interesting. The case itself was about contracts, and now that's not the most exciting subject in the world in law, but it was fascinating for me to see how the court worked. And maybe my expectations were a bit naive, but I didn't think the judge was playing it fairly like an umpire would, but kind of like an advocate to the defense, which had a very weak case. And the case went on for about 2 months, maybe more. And I was selected to be the foreperson at that time. And we got through the questions. There were about 50 questions. And we got through them fairly quickly. It was a consensus that the plaintiffs had won the case. And we presented the verdict to the judge, and he said, come back tomorrow and we'll read the verdict. And we came back the following day, and we were put into sequestration. And we didn't know why. We were put back in the jury room, wondering what was going on in the court. And no one had any idea. And then I was called by the court's representative to go and speak to the court in chambers. And I walk in, and I see a number of attorneys on one side, and right away it was pretty clear what was going on because I said good morning to all the attorneys, and the plaintiff attorney said good morning back, and the defense attorneys did not. Simple things like that give you a clue, I suppose. And I was asked a number of questions that went on for about 40 minutes. It was alleged that I had a bias that I did not disclose at voir dire, where the jurors were picked.
And that in and of itself is an interesting concept. Because, look, there is no way that anyone out there put into a jury could possibly not have some sort of bias regarding some sort of issue if you have a complex case in front of you. It's virtually impossible.
Right.
The true test here is really whether one can put aside their biases, or biases, I'm not sure how you pluralize that, but if you can do that and still judge based upon the facts and the law. This seems to be the problem with that, and why they would want to voir dire you, over your biases or biases, as I said. I'm not sure how to pluralize it, but the thing is, doesn't that seem almost counterintuitive to begin with?
It was counterintuitive, and it put me into a box, so to speak, when I got into the chambers. Because, for one thing, at voir dire, we were asked whether we had biases, and I indicated those questions in the book, and I didn't recall that I had written a few essays about NBC a couple years before that. And the fact is, I had written something negative about NBC, about something unrelated. It was about TV news that I thought was just boring and newsworthy, like the Michael Jackson trial and like the Runaway Bride. I thought this were newsworthy stories. And I also wrote positive things about NBC as well, but I forgot, didn't recall any of that. And so I brought it into the chambers a number of weeks later, and the judge brings it up that I had written things. So how do I say to the judge, hey, I didn't recall what you just brought up?
Right. And there it is. It's like a trap to try and get rid of. See, here's what the problem is. If based on the agenda again, it's based on the literal prejudice of those that are testing you, voir diring you, or trying to position you in the jury pool, right? Because what happens is it's based on what it is that they believe your beliefs are based on certain resonant actions from you. You could be hypercritical of NBC, but again, if you were able to put aside your own, bias regarding NBC and simply judge based on the facts, it would have nothing to do with your judgment. I mean, you could absolutely hate NBC and think that they're a terrible information network, think that they're an absolutely atrocious, entertainment, factory or whatever it is you want to call them at this point. And still you could judge in their favor because you're examining the facts of the case and examining the law. So, it's just one of these things where it's like, well, this guy might be trouble because he's got opinions at the end of the day, right?
Right. Here's one of the questions that was asked at voir dire.
You kind of broke up
The
there.
description of the case. Is there any member of the panel that feels he or she could not give either side or any of the parties? Oh, sorry. Hello?
Yeah, you're there now. Can you hear me?
I got you.
Okay. Just start again. You were saying that there was one. Here's one of the questions they asked during the voir dire of you.
Correct. Having heard the description of the case, is there any member of the panel that feels he or she cannot give either side or any of the parties a fair trial? Well, there you go. What you're just talking about. Can you be fair or not? Can you give them a fair trial or not? I thought I could. Another question, does anyone have any feelings about the nature or subject matter of the case that would make it difficult for you to be a fair and impartial juror? No problem there. Do you have any belief or feelings toward any of the parties, attorneys, or witnesses that might be regarded as biased or prejudiced for or against any of them? So a question like that, I didn't feel any reason to indicate yes. I didn't feel like I could be. I didn't feel like there was any problem with being impartial.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly what I was saying is that,
Yeah.
you know, just from a literal standpoint, you were there to try and contribute, you know, to the system, as it were, and say to yourself, you know, listen, I'm going to help in the process of getting something done, you know, regarding, you know, justice or injustice, or depending on what's occurring, right? You
Right.
just were there. You didn't pick the case or anything.
No.
You know, you were selected. So the thing is, you know, you felt that you could be impartial and judge based on what was presented to you, and this is what you were answering to. So meanwhile,
Meanwhile, I'm in the chambers, and I'm being reminded by the judge that I had written now some essays some time back. He only read one paragraph of one of the essays, and then proceeded to talk about essays in the plural. And in seeing the transcript, it was very helpful to see how the judge, from my point of view, set a trap. He was just going to keep on coming up with hints that I'd done something wrong and try to trick me into a false confession. He wanted me to just step aside, and I didn't know why. I still really don't know why. But none of the questions, or very few of the questions, really made any sense. And I wrote my commentary on the questions that he was asking and on the answers that I gave to give the reader an idea of what it was like to be there and what the problem was, the problem with the Chambers conversation. Conversation is a term I use advisedly. I was never allowed to volunteer anything or ask any questions myself.
well, right, and that's also an interesting exchange, watching it go back and forth, and it really does seem like, instead of, you know, you sort of, let's see if we can get this guy to contradict himself, because we have evidence that he may actually have misrepresented his prejudices, as they were. Really, it was their agenda to eliminate somebody who had something to say, anything to say regarding the case, and you know, and what were they pointing to in the essay that you had written anyway?
Oh, well, I was critical. I was critical of NBC because they put on news stories that I thought were phony. And I think the judge picked up on the word phony because fraud was an allegation made by the plaintiffs.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. See, I don't know. You know, maybe it's just me with this, you know, terrible adherence to the idea of logic. You know, in my mind, simply because they were fraudulent with a presentation on their network in one way or another, doesn't necessarily mean that I would believe that they were fraudulent regarding contracts and things like this. They could be very well, you know, they could do all of their business, you know, tight as a drum because of fear of legal reprisals, but based on, you know, whatever it is they're doing, whatever their actual agenda is, they could be presenting all kinds of you know, fictitious crap on their network, you know,
Right.
which would have nothing to do with the literal business. In other words, you know, it's almost as if they're saying, you know, you couldn't even possibly separate their business conduct from their entertainment presentation. You know, which is, it's, to me, a fallacy in and of itself. Because look, don't you understand? I mean, why not just simply ask you the question? You know, don't you understand that you know, there's a difference between what a network presents and how it conducts its business? You know, or do you believe that there is a difference? How about that? We'll ask it in a more in a less leading way. You know, do you believe that there is any difference between what a network presents and how it conducts business behind the scenes? You know, and in that way, if they believed that, since you thought their presentations were fraudulent in some way, if you said no, then they could say logically that, well, since you believe that they were presenting phony news stories, then you could easily believe that their business is phony behind the scenes, right?
Right.
So
That would have been good.
that would have been good, and it would have taken a whole lot less time than, I mean, because how much time did they really waste going through this with you?
Well, not just that day, but they really nullified the whole trial because what happened was I was excused from the jury, and it left us with 11 jurors, and the defense was asked, will you waive your right to a 12-person jury? And they said, no, we won't waive it. We want an alternate to go in there. So an alternate replaced me, and they had to start the deliberations all over again. And sometime during the deliberations, the plaintiffs and the defendants worked out a deal, which was never disclosed publicly. But I mean, why bother having the trial if they're just going to make a deal?
Well, yeah, and here it is. At the end of the day, it turns out to be a colossal waste of time. And, I would say that it was one or the other, sides of the aisle's attempt to delay the trial in order so that they could reach an agreement outside of court. But then again, the judge was a fully willing participant in this one, so unless he was on board with the delay tactic in order to get it out of his own hands, that would be a problem
Right.
too. So it seems very strange, though, that this is the way that, and again, this is a very good example of why it is that I say, when it comes to executing human beings, I don't trust the process either. The process is so corrupted
Right.
and convoluted at this point. And meanwhile, what you were involved in wasn't a life or death situation.
No.
But just imagine that, from the perspective of somebody who is on trial for their life. I mean, do I trust a system that behaves this way over a television program, essentially? Do I trust that system to make that decision, that very final type of decision? And no, I don't. So,
I mean, you're right. The death penalty is irrevocable. That's just too much power to give to anybody, I think.
Well, right. And if you can't, and again, if they continuously prove to us that they are untrustable as a bureaucracy, then obviously that bureaucracy should not be trusted with such things. And, it forces me to reevaluate the entire scope of the legal system, really. Because, incarceration, you can't give back somebody, their life if you incarcerate them for a long period of time. Or put that kind of mark on their record if a mistake was made, if the process itself was more to blame because, the deck was unfairly stacked against you. You don't have the resources of the government to fight them, whatever. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it's become inherently far too biased and far too untrustworthy as, sort of an equal system of justice at this point. So when the issue of the death penalty comes up again to me, this is something that I don't want to be a willing participant in. You know what I mean? I don't
Right.
I don't acquiesce to that personally.
But you'd probably be excused from the jury if that ever came up and you were a potential juror. So your thoughts wouldn't be included, unfortunately, with the panel that would be selected.
Yeah, believe me, there's probably a half a dozen reasons right away to get me dismissed before they ever bother with the voir dire as Exhibit A. Here's his radio show. Okay, goodbye. But to me, these are all fair questions. These are all fair questions because the appeal to authority is what disturbs me most, is that there are so many people that unquestionably accept the authorities' proclamations, and regarding all of these issues, it's valuable. And again, we started this section here basically starting to discuss social issues, but this is, a serious component to social interaction, the way that we have to, interact with our justice system as it exists. This is part of the equation, a very large part of the equation, whether we want to acknowledge that or not, right?
Right. And we need to do something about the system, the court system. As it is, we're not really asked to do a whole lot as citizens, but we are asked to be jurors. So I think the court system is a big part of how things work in our society and whether people are treated fairly or not.
Right, and this doesn't even get us into the the concern over statutory law, versus the canon of legislation, and all of that. I mean, the whole thing just is just as broken. In other words, to me, the judicial branch of government is just as broken at this point as the executive branch, as the legislative branch, and it all goes together. It's all quite corrupted and all quite leaning against, John Q. Average Guy. And this is part of what my complaint is. And of course, this starts with asking these reasonable questions, in my opinion.
Right.
You'll if you ask them honestly, and you have an honest sort of either monologue or dialogue, depending on which part of the process you're in about it. It seems as though a fair-minded individual, and of course that's very subjective, but a fair-minded individual will ultimately come to very similar conclusions, which is that the whole thing is so terribly corrupted that something needs to be done. And this is why, I may not often agree with a lot of other people regarding what their solutions are, but I can certainly empathize and sympathize, depending on which situation we're talking about here, with their desire to make a change and make a change now. This is where I'm at with the, with the debates, as it were, it seems to me as though you and I did go through similar thought processes regarding this, because, it all starts with questioning, like I say, those proclamations from the centers of authority. So, and this is why I think that this book is really great, because it absolutely gives you a really concise, grouping of things that you can question. And these aren't the only questions that are, significant out there, obviously. But this is a pretty good, summation of incidents and situations where one can sort of begin to ask the questions that'll lead them down that path, where they begin to examine things, in the objective sense. And that's why I really love it, because I'm telling you again, most authors do not bother with this part of the process at all. And meanwhile, the meat of your book is essentially this process.
Right. I wanted people to focus on the questions rather than the answers. Well, there's different answers people might come to, and that's fine. But if we don't share the common questions, the most basic questions at the root of the issue, then we're just going to be talking in different languages. Really.
Well, right, because it all has to do with the stipulations first. And, this is my term, maybe not the best term, but it's these stipulations between people when it comes to these kinds of discussions that are the real stumbling blocks, in my estimation, because, let's just put it this way. When you cannot, regardless of what your belief system is, and I'll go back to religion because that's the easiest divisive issue that we can see very early on in life, long before a lot of political beliefs are developed, or viewpoints about the general status of the world regarding, how honest it is, and how, we may be sort of jaded by our own experiences from time to time, things like that happen. One of the first introductions into this debate is usually religion at a very early age. And to even begin to ask those questions is so offensive and so divisive to some people that it shuts down the debate and the possibility for looking at the reasonable explanations for a lot of things. And causes one of those sort of divide and conquer kind of situations that lead us through a lot of problems regarding social issues and so on.
Right.
So, okay, now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, that has been a problem. To go back to the evolution of thought, I think at some point I shut out these institutions, which I realized were attempting to mislead me, and just thought for myself, and that took a while. But I thought, why don't I go with logic? Why don't I analyze the Bible and other religious matters objectively and see what conclusion I come up to? And also, I just think the way some people portray Christianity is like it's this coverall. It's like Jesus is everything, and I can't help but ask, just for example, why in Luke 12:44 Jesus appears to condone slavery. If he's the Son of God and knows all, why on earth would he be condoning something that seems to go against the principle of Christianity, which is salvation or even freedom?
See, and I look at the Ten Commandments and ask questions like that and get again hammered for it. But
Yeah.
when it says you shall have no gods before me, the phrasing in that particular commandment appears to represent to me that there is the possibility of other gods.
It sure does. It sure does.
So if there is only the one true God, then does that mean that he is the most powerful God, or does that mean he's the lead God, or is there only one God? Is this a contradiction, or not?
Right.
And I think that that's a fair question based on what is being presented to me.
Right.
But of course, this is blasphemy to so many people that you can't even begin to ask this question.
Well, what does blasphemy really mean? I mean, does it mean just somebody who contradicts the dogma? Somebody who doesn't go along with the plan.
Exactly. And talking about not going along with the plan, hey, the narrative about 9/11,
Yes.
which is immediately after the social issues section of the book, also really fascinating to me, and I wondered if you wanted to speak to that, because that's probably that is something that just looking at some excerpts from some of your other books.
Yeah.
It looks to me like this occupied a lot of your time.
It has.
So I wanted to get into that because, believe it or not, we've been on the air for an hour and 15 minutes. So,
Okay.
Go ahead.
9/11.
Let's get into 9/11 a bit. Yes, please.
Sure. Fascinated with 9/11. Believed the official theory for probably 4 years, probably until about 2005. Read some books by David Ray Griffin and others, which to me appeared to make reasonable arguments that the official theory was not true.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of I thought that the whole JFK official theory was bogus long before 9/11, but I don't know why it took me so long to catch on here. But again, I was going through things very slowly. Plus, I was kind of weighed down by some other issues. I was interested in the 2004 election, and I was going through law school, so I didn't really get to focus on it like I would have liked to. But anyways, in 2005, I was starting to have some doubts and read a number of books. And then finally, I just got a notepad out and wrote down a number of issues about 9/11 that I thought were interesting. And I always kept coming back to one of them, and that had to do with the planes. I suppose I could relate more to the allegation of airplanes or airplanes striking buildings more so than why the World Trade Center came down or why specific buildings fell down. And I focused heavily on those planes, and I took an awful lot of time. I put ideas on the internet. I asked people for feedback. And finally, in 2011, I came out with my first book that was only about 9/11, and that was Planes Without Passengers. I later did a second edition to it. But the first one was 2011. And really, I came up with a couple of facts that I believe I had asserted to be true, that I'd proven. And that the basic fact I based the book on was that no passenger flight had struck anything. That the stories about the passenger flights were not true. And I delved into that more deeply. And as I mentioned a while ago, I was so heavily into this research of 9/11, I thought it was the big issue, and I think I realized the world doesn't quite spin that way, that life moves on and other big issues emerge after it. I think it's rather a tree, and a big tree at that, in the forest of what I write about. And that prompted me to write subsequent books, namely the most recent one, Questions I Wasn't Supposed to Ask. And I thought, okay, I have an opinion, a belief about what happened, especially about the planes, but why don't I take my system of my thought, my evolution of thought, and just ask some basic questions about 9/11. And again, I posted the questions, namely the question, did anybody die at the World Trade Center? I put that on the internet, on Facebook to be exact, and I still have not gotten a coherent answer from anybody that can assert that any specific person had died on that particular day in the World Trade Center, which is, and I got a lot of hatred in response for even suggesting it, which again suggests that I had a good question.
Well, and see, now going at it, now I used to very much scoff at the idea. And I've recently had interactions with people that tell me that there were absolutely no planes on that day. But, I took a step back from my own belief system, as it were, and said to myself, well, what is the actual proof that planes struck the buildings? Is it, a fabrication and all that? And I went through that as well because I thought, again, because I didn't witness it personally with my own eyes, that this was something, maybe it was worthy of examination. Letting of the story and not just focus on, the alleged hijackers and all that kind of stuff. But you did spend some time on those other questions like I did, around the same time, actually, because I think I started to really examine it in about 2005. I unfortunately really just accepted the narrative. And again, this is despite having done a lot of work on, government lies and cover-ups, via the JFK situation, having known that the official stories can easily be absolute, nonsense, and still accepted by the public, regardless of what actually occurred. I guess the massive scale of the thing sort of intimidated me from even questioning it, and I have shamefully admitted on this show that I was one of those people who was very much up for the idea of, well, why don't we just lay to waste every part of the Middle East that has, I mean, really, that's and that was a legitimate sentiment among a large population in this country, based on again the official story. And, how bad was that? I mean, I'm ashamed that I didn't even begin to question it until a few, I didn't have law school and things to keep me back. Of course, I had other examples of things that were going on in my life,
Right.
My first child born in 1999, so I was quite, engrossed in raising her, and my second born in 2002, and of course my third born in 2014, just a few months back. But
Congratulations.
yeah, he was born in June. But kids will be quite time consuming, and I guess I could make that excuse. But the reality is that regardless of what my personal situation was, I didn't even begin to question it until a good 4 years later. And I shamefully admit that. I'm really actually ashamed of that. And of course, you want to talk about rabbit holes. I mean, every single aspect of this, you can extrapolate all sorts of different possibilities from. But where did you wind up going through it, 2005 on? I mean, I'm not even going to speak for you regarding what your position was, 2001 to 2005. I mean, I told you what mine is. But
I'll tell you, I believe the official theory for those 4 years.
Okay,
not really a whole lot of questioning.
You did the same thing I did. Okay, well, thank you. Because
no problem.
I feel terrible about it now, but I always feel a little better when I find out that I'm not alone, No,
I'm sure you're not. I mean, gee, it was monumental. It was this big event that people talked about constantly, and we're still talking about in 2005, sure. I just got to the point where I saw a crack in the story, and in reading Griffin's book in particular, but others, or I should say Griffin's books, there are more than one. But I thought, wow, what it boiled down to in 2005 through perhaps even 2010, I was thinking that the story was wrong, but I had trouble putting a finger on it. And I think I'm the kind of person that needs to, so to speak, take the needle and put it on the record where I would like to put it on the record. And I really wanted to focus on those planes. That was just the easiest for me to understand. And I concluded, as I mentioned earlier, that no passenger planes struck anything, but also found out that 2 of the alleged planes were flying long after the so-called strikes on the World Trade Centers 1 and 2, thanks to ACARS, a type of email used in planes. There were email messages that the planes responded to several minutes after the alleged attacks.
And two of them actually had registrations that they were still part of the they were still registered as working aircraft long after as well.
Right.
Which is very, very odd considering that they should have been completely destroyed in what occurred there. I mean, in fact, no remains of planes in certain places, including Shanksville, which, that's a whole bizarre thing. Really quickly, just before I forget, because every single one of my shows where 9/11 comes up, somebody comes into the chat room on the network and asks me to ask my guest whenever 9/11 comes up about the dancing Israelis that were picked up that day. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've heard of the dancing Israelis, and I'm kind of wondering why they were there and what their purpose was, but I never really have focused a whole lot on that aspect of 9/11.
Okay, I just figured I should ask it because they always pester me to ask it. So, okay. So there you go, guys. I always ask that question. Okay, whenever it is appropriate, I ask it. All right. So we were talking 9/11. I'm sorry to slow down what you were saying there, but just wanted to get it out of the way.
Oh yeah. Well, also, the story, we get the story and we're motivated by the story, like the official story of 9/11, but there are always pieces of the story that kick us into action. We think, or at least I thought about those poor passengers and how they must have known they were about to die, and that must have been in the horrifying last minutes of their lives. And also, I remember hearing the story about Ted Olson apparently getting a phone call from his wife, Barbara Olson, from Flight 77, and I think that's what I honed in on. The story, after reading about it, reading about how Barbara Olson supposedly went to the back of the plane with the pilot and called her husband to find out what she should do. It just kind of sounded weird. But I found out that Ted Olson changed the story a couple of times as to what kind of phone had been used. And he contradicted himself. Also, I have read extensively about whether cell phones could actually be used at that height during that period of time. Don't believe that to be possible based on studies that were done. And also don't believe that there were even earphones on that plane. And one more thing about Flight 77, looking through records by the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, it's apparent that that flight never even took off that day.
See, and all of these things are reasonable, suspect pieces of information if you compare them or contrast them, as it were, to the official story. And the thing is, that is often dismissed by, well, these were seat-backed phones, the phones that are kind of in the back of the seat in the first class area or whatever. This is part of the story. So that would be more reasonable because, cell phones they found could not make transmissions like that reliably from that height. And all of that kind of good stuff, but these are all reasonable parts of the questions. I mean, like I was particularly disgusted. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Flight 93.
Yes, I did.
Well, I was particularly disgusted by the immense amount of detail that was seemingly added in there because I kept saying to myself, there is no way that this is an honest representation because they couldn't have possibly had this amount of detail about certain things, and there were certain portions of it that I think were designed to evoke emotion and were definitely inserted to create a sinister narrative for people to seize upon so that they would ignore the facts regarding what actually happened there. Right. I really felt that that's exactly what that presentation was meant to do.
It was propaganda. There's just no way that any of that could have been recounted by anybody on the airplane so quickly. They were supposedly talking to people on the phone about their lives, and they're going to turn around and look at how the plane looked and how many seats there were and so on and so forth. It's kind of ridiculous. But 93 was one of the flights that was flying long after the supposed crash In his case, it's supposedly crashed in Shanksville. And it may well have flown in the direction of the Midwest, possibly Cleveland.
Yeah, this is what we find later, of course. But
Right, always later.
yeah, and here's the thing, and it's very strange regarding this sort of stream of information, because you do have to, test and reprove everything, regarding the stuff. When somebody, simply presents their let's be kind, their presentations regarding, what they call the truth.
Right.
One does have to sort of test each one of their conclusions. And sometimes these things sort of slip by because, again, you stipulate to certain things. Once again, okay, this was the plane, these were the people. Are they necessarily the people? Are they necessarily the plane? From an investigative standpoint, you sort of have to put the people on the plane, put the plane in the right place first. You know what I'm saying? Before you even get into the concept of the details that were relayed or which electronic medium was used. I mean, in other words, you really have to reconstruct everything very, very carefully in order to get some semblance of the reality of any situation.
Yeah, you do, and I don't know if all that was done in regards from our media and from our government. A lot of things were just presumed, and I kind of have this thing about presumptions. People say about assumptions. I'll say presumptions are simply beliefs without facts, and we're often guided by presumptions and discouraged from challenging them. And that's part of those questions.
Well, yeah, exactly. And of course, as we get into the last half hour, the next section is what do we need? Now, this is part of the process because first we've asked the questions, and you've taken us through the thought process. But as we go forward, now it's like, well, how do we address what is here? What is it that actually needs to be done, and do we need to address it and everything else? So, I wonder if you want to speak to that section of the book a little bit.
Right. What do we need? It's funny because we need a lot of things. It's just a matter of saying, well, where do we begin? And who are we anyway? You mean all of us? All of us in the nation of the United States? Is everybody paying attention here to, or I should say, is there a consensus of what the problems are? I think a number of people would come up with different statements or perceptions of what they think is wrong. Well, what I tried to do is say, well, to get an idea of where we're going, why don't we think about who are good leaders, or what are good examples of leaders, and what do we need in those who lead us? Because I think in every society there are those who lead. They're elected or they're chosen, and it's up to people paying attention to make those decisions. But it's like saying first things first. What do we need, and what do we need, and then what do we need in terms of those who could lead us to what we need? And I talked about people I admire. And
again, because I'm a crazy, conspiracy guy, I say that tongue planted in cheek very firmly. But because I'm a crazy conspiracy guy, I believe that that the questions begin with, do we actually require leaders to begin with? Let's think about that. And what is leadership? So, of course, it does lead, directly into your thought process. But, I'm wondering if we shouldn't begin there. You know what I'm saying?
We might. I'll tell you what, Chuck, though. I wanted to give the reader an idea of what leadership looks like. And they can discount the persons that I'm talking about all they want to. But I'm saying, in fact, we shouldn't be so harsh and expect leaders to be perfect, but we need people with courage, people who are willing to ask the kinds of questions that I put forward, people who are willing to stand up and do something unpopular. I think that's all a part of leadership. So I named people that I think had exhibited that kind of leadership, if nothing else, to get the conversation going.
Well, see, agitation is the way some people describe that, and that agitation is part of the fair process of the societal contract, as it were. Right. Regardless of how good or bad the construct is, agitation seems to be a requisite to having a reasonable and evolving, ever-changing landscape, right?
Right.
So, of course, asking the questions in and of themselves are agitation, right?
Right. We should.
And I think it's an absolute requirement for anybody who believes they live in an even remotely free society. It's an obligation really to ask questions. And as reasonable a question as one can possibly formulate. But obviously, did Santa Claus bomb Iraq? On Christmas is not a reasonable question. You know what I'm saying? But
Right.
But I guarantee you, if you search hard enough on the internet, you'll find somebody that says, Santa did it. So,
you can find just about anything you want.
and that is again speaking to the prejudices within, because people will seek out anything that will sort of resound in the echo chamber of their own mind sometimes. So that's why, again, I appreciate the process that you're going through in the book, because you're saying, listen, these are my reasonable concerns. This is why, and here's the process by which I started to challenge not only the official explanations, but my own positions, which both need to be kept in check by ever asking the questions, by ever being your own personal agitator in a way.
Right.
So, but back to what we need. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you with that, but I thought it was quite, appropriate to bring that in real quick there.
Right. I talk about we need people with no sense of entitlement, and I'm talking about people who are willing to make a sacrifice because just basic rules of life. You can't get something for nothing. Sacrifices are going to have to be made in relationships and in things we do, and trying to achieve something, and also achieve something in an ethical manner. We're going to have to sacrifice. And I mentioned Lyman Bostock, a personal hero of mine. I remember his playing days with the California Angels. Of course, his life ended tragically, but what he should be remembered is that he did poorly in his first month with the California Angels and offered to give the first month of his salary back to the team, which was just absolutely unprecedented, because he was being sincere. He thought he knew that he was playing poorly and thought that he didn't earn the money. And I just wish other people would ask themselves, am I really earning what I'm getting? Another question you're just not supposed to ask, I guess, but we should ask it anyway.
Well, absolutely. And speaking to, your own actions and your own responsibility in the discussion is one of those things that's usually left out.
Right.
Like I said, like I said at the top of the show, scapegoats are really convenient, because if you create a whipping post, whether it is vaporous or actually solid and tangible, if you can turn to that instead of letting some of those lashes, as it were, rest upon your own back, you can often find relief in that way by not taking responsibility. I mean, and this is part again of what I think is really great about what you do in this book. So,
thank you. Yes, responsibilities. We talk about other people's responsibilities, and we talk about our own rights. We collectively. I mean, I'm probably guilty of that myself. But that's the kind of leadership I'm looking for, that we talk about our own responsibilities and the rights of other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Which both are extremely relevant when we're talking about leadership. And this is the thing. Look, if you want to question whether there need to be leaders at all, it does seem as though they will emerge organically regardless of the structure.
Right.
Seems to be part of, human nature in a way. However, it is also worthy, in my opinion, to question the very basis of that. And, simply because human nature is a particular way does not necessarily mean that our behavior needs to be dictated by our most prurient and base instincts. This is, what do they always say? This is the thing that separates us from the animals, as it were. You know what I mean?
Right. But, Chuck, what do you think a leaderless society would look like?
Well, since it's never been done to my knowledge.
Well, paint me a picture. I think this would be interesting.
Well, see, there you go. How would you interact? I mean, we're going to make social contracts with one another in one way or another. We are meant to be social creatures, and it is one of those essentials of life. So we're going to interact with others. We're not going to be small island tribes onto ourselves again unless we're forced into that position, I think. But even then, it'll still evolve into a greater sort of web of interactions. And at that point, you need to organize those interactions and figure out how they will go. And you'll turn to the people that can seem to dissect those things better than yourself even. Or seem to have systems that work. And people do develop systems among themselves. So it's one of those things where it'll still evolve into something that'll resemble it by a different name. So I don't think that sort of... I teeter back and forth between, whether a true state of anarchy would be, an effective way to conduct ourselves as a species or not. Because eventually somebody figures out that greater numbers, can allow them to do as they please. You know what I mean? And this is why people congregate. So because of the congregations of others, you sort of need to congregate yourselves. And when you do that, this is almost the reason why these things, so it's one of those like constantly revolving thoughts in my mind. You know what I mean?
Right.
So is it even a possibility? I mean, it's almost like saying, well, what if we all lived in eternal darkness? Would the human race survive? It's one of those possibilities that I honestly cannot even fully wrap my mind around.
No, I was just hoping that we could adapt, and that's all that would be, just hope. Well, I don't really know.
Well, exactly, and that is the trouble with it. I mean, yes, in a world where everybody respects everybody else's boundaries, as it were, we don't need governments, we don't need armies. We could simply, we don't need courts. We could solve our own problems with each other, provided we were all reasonable individuals. But here's the problem with that. Reasonable, as defined by me, may not be the same as what it is for you. And, you get 3 or 4 of us, in one particular place at one particular time, you could very well have extremely divergent views of what is a reasonable transaction of anything. This is what I come down to, is that I'm not fully capable of wrapping my mind around the concept in the first place. So it wouldn't be me to even try to paint you a picture of this.
Right.
And I know that sounds a little like a cop-out, but it's my honest answer.
Yeah, but in the context of where do you think we're headed? I mean, what can we do about our current leadership, or what can we do about the direction our society is going? Do we really still have power as individuals?
Well, we all still do have the ability to agitate in a social sense. So change is still a possibility. Now, whether we're going to change things for the better or for the worse, this is, again, one of those subjective deals. I mean, there are people that will tell you that the society in general that we live in today is much better than it was 30 years ago. I think they're completely insane, but that is still their opinion based on what they think about that society. And this is not even just like young people who figure that, it's just great because, we have computers and you guys, had rocks, and it's like, well, we have computers too, but...
Yeah. Remember the Apple?
Right. Actually, I do. Yeah, there was one of the first. I learned how to program that thing. I was happy and proud of myself. I'll tell you. But the Apple IIe, even Okay.
Oh yeah.
Or the Apple II.
2 Plus. We have the 2 Plus. My parents are both computer programmers, so we got one pretty early.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? How old are you exactly?
46.
Okay, you're only a couple of years older than me. So, we're in the same generational. You were just born in the late 60s. I was born in the early 70s. So,
right.
Wow. But it is definitely a different world than what we grew up in.
Sure.
Now, as for whether we made some improvements, I mean, look, I can point to certain things as improvements. To me, despite all of the unrest that's been out there recently regarding racial situations, that's become much less of an issue in our lifetime, in my opinion.
I think so.
Emotionally, I mean, don't know about your background as far as children and stuff like that, but my children don't even have the same concerns that I did regarding, racial issues. They're in a different world, pretty much. I mean, I have no better way to even state that. And I'm kind of glad for that, because that means that's one of those tensions they don't need to have. Now, there's a lot of things going wrong nowadays that they don't, realize. But then I look back, during our lifetime again, when I was their age, and I say to myself, gee, if I had known this when I was a teenager, or if I had known that when I was a small child, I definitely would have approached the world in a completely different way than I did, and we would have a whole other situation going on here than we do today,
Right.
And if we en masse had understood some of the great deceptions that were occurring, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s even, and maybe spoke up and pushed back against them, we may not have the terribly corrupt situation that we have now. We may have a worse situation. I'm not saying that that our efforts could have been, could have made things better necessarily, but they would have been different for sure.
Right.
And today I see a mess and kind of wish I could rewind my time, but but anyway, and you know what? It's the last 15 minutes here, and this is where of course the last part of your book is my final answers. And I'll tell you something. I love the fact that you even titled it that way, because you're not presenting this with the hubris that a lot of other authors do. And again, just for the listener, questions I wasn't supposed to ask is not a large book. It is something that it's not a difficult read. It is not given to you like from on high, so that you feel as though you're being talked down to by some philosophy professor. This is really relatable, really easily understood language, and carefully laid out thought processes on paper. Okay, but my final answers already gives us the notation in our minds that these are your answers from what you've been able to extract from what you have laid out in the book. And again, it's 202 pages, and like I said earlier, it's the one with the green and the red puzzle piece on the front cover. I like the cover design. Very basic, but very striking and identifiable.
Oh, I need to give a shout out to Stuart Miles. He devised that.
Well,
I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thumbs up to Stuart. And I'll tell you, if my plans come to fruition, maybe I'll have to talk to him about a book cover, because I'm planning on putting out something. I mean, I'm going to work on it starting in a couple of weeks, and we shall see. I mean, God knows people are already half crazy with me doing this radio show. But
well, that's great. I'm happy to hear it.
But hey, why not put a book out there?
Yeah.
See if people can, learn something and help me learn something. That's what I try and do on here. Actually, is not speak down to people and tell them that I know all the answers, but have conversations like I've had with you, where we explore different ideas and different processes. And I think that if one takes a book like yours and goes through it objectively, again. Even if you don't agree with every single thing that you brought up, like, I could give you some small critiques about things, like I wouldn't have done it necessarily this way or that way.
Right.
But again, I could say that this is an honestly written analysis of things. And I can't ask for more out of somebody who's putting something like this out. And I hope to do the same, regardless of which subject it is I actually finally decide to commence to putting together into a book form. But
I believe it'll be good.
Let's get to my final answers, because and not to give away everything in the book. I mean, I'm obviously not trying to go through everything, but I wanted to seize upon a couple of examples and see what you have to say about that. Because as I said, we're down to just about the last 11 minutes or so, and we'll point everybody to where they can get the book and everything else, and mention some of the other ones that I haven't read yet, which I'm going to have to get, because again, an honest analysis of anything is always worthy of a spot on my bookshelf. And believe me, I don't keep many books anymore. I have cut down on my library, but I'm going to keep this one. So, so my final.
Thank you.
No problem. Anybody who again puts out an honest piece of work, I applaud, regardless of whether I agree with them or not. I can always applaud an honest piece of work, and also I do actually agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying throughout, and that's actually hyper problematic for me, especially when it comes to the JFK assassination, because I get so upset about it, because it's like, when you're reading a book and you're literally yelling at it, you should know better. And I'm that kind of guy. I don't know. This is probably why I don't watch TV very often, because I would just scream at the thing all the time, and I'd be one of those crazy old men, and I don't want to do that. So I'll just yell at my books quietly in the dark. And sorry again. My final answers is the final part of the book, and please go ahead and just kind of give people a flavor of that anyway.
Well, I tell people, don't be afraid. Don't let fear control you. There's actually some things we shouldn't be afraid of that seem to be circulating in the media, for one thing. I talk about presumptions. There seems to be a presumption going around. It's something I hear a lot, that somehow the government is going to take everybody's gun away, and I'm wondering how on earth. Now, I work for a local city, and I don't see how government agents would actually bother to go to somebody's door and say, "Please give back your gun." I don't think that's going to happen. I would say instead, just relax. Also, I ask people to think about who might be gaining when we hear about gun-related incidents. I did point out that the gun sales have gone up following what's allegedly happened in Ferguson and other places. But our fears about having things taken from us, or about the world ending, or other sensationalist claims like that, we should not let these claims control us. And I think this ties back to the beginning of the book, where I talk about my own personal experiences. I let fear control my thoughts, my beliefs. And if there's one piece of wisdom that I wanted to impart with readers, it would be that. Ignore fear when you're trying to come up with a conclusion. Let your logic win out. I give some specific examples as to that.
Well, right, and trauma-based programming is one of the real sort of devils in the detail, because all of the things that we're talking about here, all of the specific historical events, all of the ways that individuals attempt to control the discussion, control the behaviors of people in society, seem to all have that sort of common loop to them, which is about seizing upon people's fears. It's about focusing on them and causing them to react based on them. And this, of course, is one of the things that I didn't highlight during this discussion, but you do seem to continuously roll back over that, and you know what? You're absolutely correct. This is the point, that when you are kept in fear, you are kept in a dishonest position where you are forced to react instead of acting. And I often point back to that phrase, which I do love very dearly, although it was, I think it originated with a comedian out in our stream of consciousness. But I mean, when he said that there are really only two emotions in the world, there is fear and love, and that is all there actually is, and you're only motivated by one or the other, the reality becomes, and I probably very badly paraphrased that, But the reality comes that you can choose to act in either fear or love, and when you choose to act in fear, nothing good will actually come of it at the end. When you choose to act in love, you are doing a greater good for yourself and for the rest of the world. And I do believe that. That is philosophically where I'm at, and I'm not perfect. I don't proclaim to never act out of fear, but I'm trying. I'm definitely trying. So that's where I'm at with that, and I do really appreciate your time, and absolutely want to thank you again for coming on. We're down to about the last 5 minutes now. I'm sorry I sound like a clock, but I like to do that. Like to do that, especially for the guest, because I absolutely hate it when I have somebody on who says, "Oh, I wish I had been able to say this or that, while I was on with you, And unfortunately, I won't be able to talk to you right after the show because my wife's show comes on after this one, so I've got to kind of turn the computer right over to her. But if you don't mind, I definitely will be in touch with you again.
Yes, definitely.
Because I'd like to talk in detail more about some of these other things. And I'll tell you what, as soon as I have some money, I'm going to get some of your other books, and we're going to have discussions about those too. Because if you can do this type of presentation in only 202 pages, I'm extremely enticed to want to look at the rest of your work. And I've seen your name around and things like that for a while, for the past few years. But honestly, I mean, no disrespect intended, but I mean, I can't read every single author who catches my eye. But this one was definitely worth the read, worth the time, and I would definitely advise people to get this book. I don't know if it's the first one that they should get yet because I haven't read the others, but I have a feeling that if you start with this one, you would not be doing any disservice to yourself regarding the stuff that you've read or the stuff that you'll wind up reading of Dean and Dean T. Hartwell. You can find him that way. As I said, there's an Amazon page, and you can find him, I believe, on Barnes & Noble and in a lot of other places where books are sold. Generally speaking, there's a website devoted to your work also, right?
Yes. DeanHartwell.weebly.com.
Right, and also if you just look on Facebook, there's books authored by Dean T. Hartwell, which is a page also.
Yes.
And you can find it that way. But I wonder if there's anything you kind of want to add here in the last few minutes, anything that we kind of missed through this discussion, you think? Go right ahead, sir. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, as I said a while ago, you wondered about my background. I will say I don't have any children. That kind of prompted a thought that some of my writing is, if I had a son or a daughter, this is the kind of thing I would be telling them. And that's the tone I think some of this most recent book took. Questions I wasn't supposed to ask. I'm saying, well, I will do my best to help you with this world that we live in. And here's my advice. And perhaps these are questions that I wish I had thought of sooner, but here they are. Don't ever hesitate to ask questions.
Well, right, absolutely, and again, like I said, although I may not agree with everything that you put forth here, I do appreciate the process by which you brought it out, and that alone, like I said, is worth the read for anybody, regardless of how you might agree or disagree with what Dean has had to say. Like for instance, I sort of disagree with your attitude regarding gun control, but this is my opinion based on my experiences, and I see some objection in the chat room and stuff to what you had to say, but it's okay. It's okay. We can agree to disagree, and also think to look at the process by which you've gone through, and you know what, even if you don't end up landing where Dean has landed, going through the process with him is, again, absolutely well worth the read. Questions I wasn't supposed to ask. So, Dean, again, I really am very happy that you came on tonight, and this has been really good, and I'm hoping to do this again.
Yes, definitely.
And hope that we got to everything that you wanted to. And of course, that is probably what is going to prompt me to make sure that I commit to a singular written form. Some of my thoughts is because I want to make sure that it's there, for my kids and on beyond my lifespan, as it were. Just so that, look, even if the whole world thinks I'm an idiot and my kids think I'm an idiot, at least they have a sort of an honest idea of how much of an idiot I was. That'll be just fine. As long as they have kind of an honest portrait. See, I'm all about trying to be honest about the process.
Sure.
So and I say again, that is the best part of what's going on in this book, is that, here's what I think is reasonable to start with, and here's how I went through the process. Well, sounds to me like we're probably going to get interrupted.
I just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped, but it's no hype.
And there we go. Everybody have a good night. Stay tuned for Jaded coming up next. Kim will be on. Thanks. Bye.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
See, but I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, pistols and fondle slab of choice, I don't know, computers doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from, as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information, because seriously, they mention just read two sources whenever I